Hey, it's Chris here for this month's interview with Andy Norton. How you doing this evening, Andy?
Hi, I'm good, Chris. Good to see you in person again.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. So this interview has some really great timing for us because myself and a few other local Ontario collectors are putting on an event in August called May the North Be With You. And we're going to have panels, a lot of special guests, and a toy show. And this month's interview guest is going to be one of our very special guests at May the North Be With You. And that's going to be August 4th to 6th in Toronto. So if you're anywhere nearby, especially in the States, you should sort your travel plans immediately. But we are very, very, very happy to be joined this evening by Roger Christian. And, to this audience, a lot of people probably already know Roger's name, but, he won an Academy Award for his work on Star Wars and a nomination for his work on Alien. And of particular relevance to this audience, he was the second unit director on Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace. So we are extremely pleased to be joined by him this evening. How you doing, Roger?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Roger, it's a real privilege meeting you. I read your book, Cinema Alchemist, when it came out. It was 2016, 2017, around that
around
time.
Then, yes.
And so first, a fantastic book, all about, I think, for me particularly, what I love about Star Wars and what I love about Alien is the look. The look brings you in as much as anything, and you are so much that look. But first question I had for you. So Cinema Alchemist is the title of your book. It's a fantastic title. Where did you come up with that?
You know why? I thought I used scrap metal and I got an Oscar for it. So I turned base metal into gold. So I thought, okay, alchemist, that's what the true meaning of it is. So I thought that might be appropriate.
And I think it's very appropriate because you I think a shoestrings probably too strong a word, but certainly cinematically, Hollywood budgets, you weren't working with a huge amount. Can you tell us about that process of sourcing the materials that created the look? First of all, for Star Wars, presumably 1976, when you were looking around.
We started 75 actually in August. There was only John Barry, the designer, myself, and Les Dilley, the art director, and George and Gary, and that was it. And George paid. Fox didn't greenlight the picture, so George paid us from his own money. We set up in a tiny studios in London, and having got back and having read the script finally, and hearing the budget from Peter Beale in London, we all thought, how are we going to do this? Because it was just not possible. And so we kind of just, I've always thought outside the box. And my first conversation with George in Mexico was when he said, I'm trying to make this science fiction film. And I said, well, I don't relate to science fiction movies so far. I think they should be old and dirty and gritty and real. Nothing's real that I see. It's all fantasy. And I said, I think it's like an old car dripping oil in a garage. Well, little did I know at the time, I was designing exactly the Millennium Falcon that George had written. So that's how it started. And then we got into London, and I broke my script down, had 10 pages of stuff, and I thought, well, this is not going to be possible. I can't do this. And plus, we knew the shoot date was looming once Fox greenlit, so there was no time to do the conventional art department, which was right. Really, no one else could do it but John and I think. And we had to make R2-D2 work because there was no radio control. Was really primitive, despite what the special effects guys in England said. They were we're going to be great. We knew it wouldn't. There's no CGI. There was nothing. C-3PO we knew we could make, but not R2-D2. So we made him around Kenny Baker. And I was buying bits of scrap junk already to stick on him because we made a wooden one with a lamp top on the head.
And was he one of the first things that you made, because he features heavily in your book, and I sort of had a thought about that today, because some of these props, some of these robots, they're so iconic because they are made, well, not with everyday objects. It was a big lampshade, wasn't it? The original prototype R2D2's head. But if you had today's technology where you could 3D print whatever you wanted, do you think that the character of the props of the stars, essentially R2D2, C3PO, do you think that they would be as they are? Do you think, or would they be different?
Who knows? I mean, everything's. I'm always one looking forward. I don't look back, except for the Star Wars and the origins and everything. But there is a certain, that George wanted a spaghetti western in space, and basically, I love Sergio Leone's westerns made for $1 million there you go, in Spain. To me, they were all more real than these big, massive Hollywood westerns that they make. And I think picking up what you're saying, I just think there's some organic process that happens that gets up on screen because everything is kind of cobbled together and made to work. And it's real. Everything we did was real. God bless Ralph McQuarrie, because he drew R2D2 and C3PO. His 6 paintings we had, Star Wars is there in those paintings, this genius. But honestly, without R2D2 walking, George didn't have a movie. It wouldn't be possible. So we set about to make that work and conquered that. And we knew C3PO would work. So how this whole use thing came about, I particular peeve with science fiction weapons in the past. And I know I've made a few myself like that. I had to for a couple of films. But so I just thought, you know what, I'm going to go to Bapty, who I knew, the gun hire place. I got the Sterling submachine gun, and I could have used that as a science fiction weapon. They're so beautiful. But I just stuck T-strip around the barrel, got some of the boxes of old unused stuff that Baptist had, found sights, stuck those on the top, and created a blaster that could fire. Actually, some of the shots early on Star Wars, there is smoke coming out and a bit of a flash. Unfortunately, the rejector for the bullet casings went the wrong way, so it was hitting other stormtroopers. So George had to say, all right, I'll rotoscope that later. And I Han Solo, as always described by George as a Western gunslinger. And I found that Mauser that I just thought looked exactly like a sci-fi version of a weapon. It had a wooden stock handle. And again, I just stuck things on the top sights. And that's when I called George over with John Barry, because I hadn't told them what I was doing. And it was my kind of make or break moment. Would I get fired? Or this was on the right track? And George loved them and stayed with me. And he got his fingers covered with super glue. And we made Princess Leia's gun in there, sticking bits on it. That set the tone. And I knew then I could get done what we had to do. And they only greenlit the film in December the 22nd. So we moved into the old British Associated British Picture Studio, which became EMI. On January the 6th, we were shooting at the end of March. I mean, 2.5 months to do this big a sci-fi picture was like, it's a testament to my last words in the book saying, don't let anyone tell you you can't, you can. Yeah. And I've kind of grown up like that. So I think I knew I could not do what Ralph McQuarrie had painted and what George and John Barry were talking about with the Millennium Falcons. So, and I knew airplane junk was nothing. It was sold by weight. No one wanted it. So they flew me in a little light aircraft around 4 airfields where there were mountains of scrap. I can't tell you. It was like manna from heaven. And so we just bought a load of it. And I think in the book, there's one thing. Frank Bruton was the biggest prop master. He used to do Stanley Kubrick's movies and huge films. He was in charge of everything. And I was standing next to him in the prop room because I'd had him clear it out. I said, we don't need anything like you've done conventionally before. There's no furniture, there's no curtains. And this low loader backed in, and honestly, on the back were about 6 Rolls-Royce Derwent jet engines. There was scrap. And it backed in, and I just heard his voice. You know, you're mad, boy, don't you? But bless him, he was one of the very few on that whole film who supported me. He just said, up in my office, boy, tea's on in 5 minutes. What do you need? So I said, I need tools. I need to teach the prop boys how to break it down. You can't just stick it randomly on walls. It has to be engineered like a plane or a submarine where there's triplicates of everything. And that's what we did. And that kind of set the tone for everything. You know, John, not having the budget to do much, had designed the Little Prince in Tunisia and knew what the regions there. So he took George down there, and George fell in love. There was an alien planet, you know, and all John had to do was put a few domes on the buildings, and I had to dress scrap. I put airplane junk. I put the food warmers from airliners. I filled the whole place up. We built a crashed spaceship that was as big as a Boeing 707. You know why that was there? And it's there when they walked past going into the cantina, because there was an olive tree and it spoiled this desert landscape. And we certainly couldn't cut it down. It was a income for a farmer in Tunisia. So
okay,
I had to
I
build it.
appreciated that for the book.
Yeah, and I was driving scrap down to Tunisia. Everyone thought I was mad, but there wasn't. I mean, Tunisia used everything that was there, so I would take scrap. I built that out of we bought a vac forming machine that was very new at that time, and John Barry was kind of always umming and ahhing about it because it cost $10,000. But they've printed out C-3PO, all of his stuff on it. They printed out huge numbers of panels that they just stapled, and we created the Death Star interiors out of them. And I grabbed a whole load of those and I stuck them on the crashed spaceship and got a blowtorch and burnt them so it looked like scrap metal. I mean, it's only a short way of encompassing it, but that's how basically the film was done.
Yeah.
Minuscule budget.
On the subject of that, I really appreciate that you've sort of taken to telling the story of the original production of Star Wars, and you've really sort of embraced it. And I recently rewatched A Galaxy Built on Hope. It's my second time watching it, and I wanted to sort of ask you about it from a sort of director's perspective, because there's a lot of stuff going on in that movie in terms of presentation style. Like, you've got virtual backgrounds. Sometimes it's more traditional interview format. Sometimes David West Reynolds is almost giving a presentation that you're watching and involved in. And you've managed to fit little nuggets of story about, you know, people like Liz Moore or Bill Harmon, who Bill Harmon is just a real character in the documentary, and he's not, you wouldn't, I suppose my analysis of it is that he's not a natural presenter, but, you know, he's around work and he has had an amazing career, and you've managed to sort of get him in a way that was comfortable for him, and it came off really well. So I was just curious, what was the approach to that? Did you always know it would be sort of a mixed media type of piece?
Two things, actually. One, again, it was made like the first film with no money because we couldn't get backing for it. And it's privately backed by producer here, Ritu Sharda, and a producer in Los Angeles, Stephen Neer. They did it. They came up with the funding for me to do it that was bare minimum. So I was actually planning on flying around interviewing people all over the place, and COVID happened. And we were landlocked, as you know, in Canada. I mean, you couldn't get in or out. So right. I'd had a demonstration. I'd been taken down. There was a virtual studio in the middle of Toronto, and I went for a demonstration. And afterwards, I let everybody go, and I went to the CEO, and I said, I think you've just answered a problem that I have. Would you be prepared if I want to do a Star Wars documentary? That word opens the doors. And they did it at cost for me. We were the first person to really use it freelance because they made children's programs. So it saved my bacon because I could link up to Bill in London directly with the studio. So he and I were together basically, but in different cities, but we could talk together. And that kind of solved a massive problem for me. And then I've looked at a lot of documentaries and writing the book, and John Rinsler, the late John Rinsler, who was a dear friend, who was the head of literature at Star Wars, he helped me a lot structuring it, because I would put down loads of ideas and all stuff like that, and him being a New York Times best-selling author, and he ran the Star Wars Insider magazine, everything. He just said, no, start at the beginning and end, and just shaping it down like this. So I did. And I knew, there's so much controversy over the lightsaber. Everyone says, there was only one and everything. When finally I got David French, who's the man where I got them all from, who's talking on camera saying, 33 went into the production. We sold him 33 for £800. Can you imagine?
Amazing.
And and I wanted Bill because no one knows him. Bill used to make props and sets for the Monty Pythons, and I'd done commercials with him, and Bill was always a joker. He was always funny, natural comedian. So I knew he would be okay with no money and doing what we were doing. In fact, the wooden R2-D2 is marine ply from his garage. And the speeder that we had to make, Luke's speeder, that we also knew was going to be impossible. How are we going to do it? So we built mock-ups. And the first one, Bill brought some wheelbarrow wheels from his garden. We used that and put it on that. So I thought, I've got to get Bill in here. He's such a comedian, and he lives here in Toronto. So those people, and then David West Reynolds was the one who grabbed me. When I was directing Second Unit on Phantom Menace, there's an annual picnic at the ranch at Skywalker every July. I was there. Suddenly this young man came barreling down to me. You're Roger Christian. I need to ask you a question. Don't know what's going on.
Wow.
And they'd lost my interview that Charlie Lippincott had done with everybody on the day. It had gone, vanished. So when John Rinsler wrote The Making of Star Wars, I was hardly in it because he couldn't find who did all this stuff. And then David is the one who forced me to write the book with the blessing of Lucasfilm. So I thought he's a natural because he's the one in the first Star Wars book he did. He created how the crystal worked and how it would attract a Jedi and all of this stuff. So he's a great Star Wars geek. He's dressing up all the time and everything. So
Right.
I thought he'd be ideal. And then there was so much stuff, and we only had a limited time and budget. So my editor and I did it all together. I know Urban Post here, the post-production house, the owners are friends of mine. They allowed us to have one editing suite for 1 year while COVID was on because we were safe. We would go in, everything was monitored, and they only allowed a certain number of people. We were within that. So he and I spent a year putting it all together. He did it all in his edit suite with me. We did all the special effects, all the compositing, everything. We did it ourselves. So, and I also knew that now it's going to, they need to sell it to a streamer. So we've broken it into 6 episodes now, and I knew that was coming. So they're now trying to organize that and try to get a sale of it somewhere. And so that's partly why it was done that way.
So, is that I don't know if that's out there. So is this streaming version going to be longer? Is it going to have cut content, or is it going to be
the
padded
same
out?
length. No, we put everything in. I just said to them, we should do a fan special, which is the 2-hour 20, which has got everything the fans have ever asked me about, and also about Star Wars, and then and the philosophies, everything behind it. I thought we'd just pack it all in there, and every event I go to, every Star Wars thing, I'm asked all these questions. So I thought, right, I'm going to throw it all into one.
Right. Well, I suppose we're contributing to that problem yet again. But I did just watch it, and I absolutely encourage everyone to find it. And it looks like there'll be some news where they can find it more easily soon.
Yeah, they got to find a place for it to find a home. So we'll see what happens on that.
Yeah,
nothing's easy these days.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about is I believe I've heard you say, it might have been in the film, that the sort of interior hold of the Falcon was probably your favorite set on Star Wars. And I just I was thinking about that a lot when I was rewatching the documentary, because that's one of those sets that, man, has Lucasfilm and Disney ever got their money out of that room? You know what I mean? Like, it's Star Wars was made for $11 million. It'd be interesting to think about what fraction went into the making of that set, and then think about them rebuilding it as precisely as they could for much more money 35 years later, for example. And the fact that now there's 2 or 3 theme parks that you can walk into an approximation of it. It's that must be a very strange experience for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's, that the first set we ever did, I dressed up, was the cockpit, and that was the one that George signed off on, and that we the first one was done a bit more like 2001, and then I came in and messed it up, put in old fighter pilot seats and messed it up a bit and made it a bit more like it should be. But that big set, I was buying junk and putting it in, and it looked terrible. And I was buying more junk and more and sticking it up, and I would despair that people would come round and look at it, because I thought, they are going to think I'm mad. This isn't going to work. And we just persevered, and finally, suddenly, it just looked amazing. And then people would walk around and go, "Wow, this looks like a real ship." And I knew then that this crazy idea would work. And once we'd aged it a bit and dripped oil on it and everything, but I think, yeah, I always say that's the set that I got it right, and then that's really the trigger for Alien. That set is knowing that I could do that whole Nostromo and make it look like an army truck that Ridley wanted.
Did you have the same? Because with the budgetary constraints you had, I would, sort of from a Star Wars perspective, I'd be interested to know what would be different if the budget wasn't slashed. Essentially, it was slashed by $0.7 million. What would have looked different if it hadn't? Is Alien essentially what Star Wars would have looked like if the budget hadn't been slashed?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, it was again another risky venture for Fox, because it was an R-rated science fiction film, so they didn't know it would work. And Ridley's same idea. I want an army truck in space, and I understand that language. I don't need it explained. The poor designer came to me and said, I don't understand what he's talking about, because he'd never done science fiction or hadn't got a clue of this hardware. And I think my brain worked that way. So it was a good kind of connection put together by destiny, I guess, for George at that time. But I just think, those armies of props putting in pipes and dirt and we were breaking down old telephone exchanges, anything I could get my hands on that looked interesting, we'd stick into it. And I think it goes back to your original question. I just think it bleeds through the screen somehow, and I look now and see a lot of pristine stuff, or a lot of it's done CGI now, and amazing. You can do anything now. It has turned the corner. I mean, they're now making stuff look real and old. So it can be done now, but way, way higher cost than we would have done the first one. And I think, what would happen if it hadn't got to the screen, the first one, because it was touch and go that it would get made.
Do those junkyards still exist? If someone wanted to be the next you, could they do that?
No. After Alien, I found this out because I was off doing my own movies and stuff. I found this out on Phantom Menace. Rick McCallum came to me and said, "You know what I had to do? Now you started an entire industry in Britain. Now you can only rent that stuff at huge cost." For Phantom Menace, they brought in planes from the Texas junkyards. It was cheaper to buy it there and fly it in to Tunisia and London. So, yeah, no, it changed.
And the other sort of slightly linked question, and going back to something you said before, so I was reading about Luke's macro binoculars that you clearly very pleased with how they looked, but being worried when Q Stark's throwing them, and eventually the lens was lost.
Sorry.
What
Yeah, look.
I was
Can you
wondering.
see that?
Oh yeah,
My nightmare came true.
yeah,
See?
yeah. The lens.
I met the actor who played Biggs, and recently in Toronto, he was at a Comic Con in Hamilton, and he gave me the picture, and there it is, with the lens fallen off it, which we managed to get on for the shoot. Yeah,
But I was thinking, so this stuff. So you talk about super glue when you were making up the stormtroopers' guns, gluing on the T strip. When they're firing, is stuff you mentioned the cartridge would be shooting out, hitting a stormtrooper? Were bits falling off the guns as well, or was it pretty?
yes.
Could it withstand that?
Actually, the super glue worked really well. The gun stood up, and then Baptist made a few that were screwed properly and done properly. So for the background, and they printed off some in. They molded them and made a few, but yeah, things all the time were falling apart. First day of shooting, C-3PO had never had the full suit on. There was no time, and Norman Reynolds popped down. Gold tape was holding him up. And when I visited George about 7 or 8 years ago, when he was digitizing the 6 movies for that Blu-ray release, and he came out of the theater and he said, "Come and look at this." And he said, "I've had to almost redo the entire effects of the film. And on Darth Vader, on the first movie, you can now, it's digital, see all the gaffer tape holding everything in place." So, yes, it was exactly that. You got away with it with the film. The film softens things, and the way it was. But once it's gone into digital, every detail shows up.
Or the matte paintings show up more,
Yeah.
and the cardboard
Yep.
soldiers in the metal.
There's a lot of interesting details, especially around the way things were shot. Because like in the first film, there's not really a close up on the Graflex hilt per se. Like you
No.
don't, it never takes up too much screen real estate.
No.
And of course, famously, the first time they tried that in Empire Strikes Back, you can read the words "Made in New York" on the bottom of the thing.
Yeah.
So, how much knowledge did you have of how well these things would be scrutinized on the first film?
On the first one, I got silver tape and put it round the Graflex names and everything. So I covered all of that. And then knowing the way George was shooting like a documentary, I knew that he wasn't one to go close up. Oh, here's a new toy. Look, let's do it all in close up. It was just part of the action for him. So, right. As you say, and there's not one shot of the end of it apart from Empire. And that set decorator, I still rail against it. He changed and he stuck rivets to hold the T-strip in, which to me ruined it because it's a mystical object of the dead Jedis. And when you put rivets in, you think, oh, this is humans made this. It was wrong. Unfortunately, he'd never done science fiction before, and they didn't have a kind of, I don't know, I hear excuses, or maybe the glue didn't stay on in the cold. I don't know, but I would have. Super glue is pretty good. I just use the basic super glue, and it pretty holds up in light or not. So, yeah, they're interesting, these how history, because I watch so carefully Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I wondered if Dave Filoni, who's a stickler for everything that I did on the first one, when that lightsaber was going to be revealed in the desert, when he put it down, and then, yeah, he went back to my original without the rivets.
Yeah, I'm partial to the bubble strip myself as well.
The bubble strip.
It just picks up light. It picks up the light really nice.
Yeah, and they put in cheap computer kind of. Anyway, it's not me. I had to make 3 up because one had to go to the special effects boys, John Steers, because it was my idea. I was playing around with front projection material for art installations and things, and I said maybe if we put a rod and paint it, we might pick up a bit of light. And so John Steers put a motor in one of my hilts, and it did work, actually. The DP railed against it, but it actually picked up some light, which helped. And more than that, it helped with Alec Guinness and Dave Prowse on the fight with Darth Vader and Obi-Wan, because we had decided the blades should not go through each other. They should be like conventional swords, so they could hit the sticks and know not to go through. They broke quite a few of my sticks then, but that's so there was always 3 made, and there was, in the end, as he says, David French, here's the words from the actual source, that 33 went and was sold to the production. That's how many hilts there were there. So it's some anal collector and fan has said, no, there's only one. There can only ever be one. So I answered that without having to argue about it.
So because you describe your sort of influence for Star Wars being, you wanted that Wild West life, you also describe, it sounds to me like the actual process of filming Star Wars was like the Wild West. You had the issues, weather, storms, losing the roof. But back in Tunisia for the life of Brian, in the curfew, you were at real risk of being shot. So that, can you tell us about that experience?
Oh, yeah, that's the Pythons. We landed, and it started then because Terry Jones got uppity and didn't want to stay in the line, and then he got a gun, threatened with the gun, go to the back of the line. He was screaming like playing Brian's mother. We thought, oh, it's going to start already. And they sorted that out. That was the first recce. We're in the hotel, and they wanted to go. Somebody had told them about a restaurant way out. Oh, we had to go there. So we all piled in 3 Mercedes, drove fast out there. The drivers kept saying, we've got to go. We've got to leave. And the Pythons were having great time and fun and everything, until finally the driver came in and said, we are going now. Ordered them out. We drove. I could see Terry Jones terrified with his eyes like this in the car. We were doing like 90 miles an hour down terrible roads, screamed into the city as tanks were rolling in. And we got in 1 minute to 9 when the point was you got shot if you were on the street. And there was no, people were being shot there. This was no holdback. Didn't matter if you're a Python or not. That's how it started. It was like a Python sketch, actually.
Yeah.
And we were all looking out the balconies, watching tanks and hearing shots and stuff going on. But the whole thing, again, was Pythons were very low budget. And the whole thing, we lucked out. Zeffirelli had made Jesus of Nazareth TV series there and left these amazing sets. So I just took them and reworked them all. And Tunisia itself, we shot the Life of Brian, the end. Let's all look on the bright side of life with the crosses. That was built right where Luke's homestead was in Matmata. Right, the same place exactly. We set it up there. Yeah, it's another book really, but I thought I don't know I could take up any more time. I got to keep working.
But was there that sense of threat outside the curfew hours when you're doing the filming and doing your work?
I didn't feel that because we left Tunis, which is where more the hotbed, and we were in Sousse, which is a holiday area. And we were kind of contained down there. So we were actually out of that. No, we just had to deal with tourists and people coming in because it was a tourist hotspot.
Sort of jumping around a bit. The other thing that going back to Star Wars is it was a different sort of conflict. It sounded like people were very, particularly the British teams, were quite sceptical of what you're doing, but it also led to some of the funnier moments in your book. So particularly, you mentioned earlier about R2-D2 not working in the desert, the remote control just not working because of the dust, but you having the backup on essentially fishing line and John Steers basically saying, well, it's not his fault. His one didn't work. It was the taxis.
Yes.
That must. There's sort of a few sort of light-hearted moments like that. Was the overall experience one of conflict, or was it
No, it was
generally a
conflict.
happy time on
No, not
set?
at all. It was total conflict. When we moved to the studios, EMI, first thing they did was put all the weapons that I'd made and stuck together myself on a table. There was Chewie's crossbow. I mean, all the things that I worked out at. And the first AD, the prop on the floor, a whole load of them ADs all came down, looked at what I was doing. He actually picked it up, threw the stormtrooper's blaster at me and said, "This is crap. Don't you realize we're doing a science fiction film for an American director?" And went off to get me fired. And that started it. And it was like that. And if you watch, there's a very interesting Christopher Nolan, George Lucas interview on YouTube, and which George never really spoken about much. But twice he said, you know, Christopher, there were only 5 people stood by my side on that entire shoot, and that was the art department. We were already friends, having spent 4 months with him, but I was also making my dream job. You know, even though there was no money, I was doing what I had creatively been aspiring to since I was young. And yeah, there were terrible camps, you know, mostly led by the DP on one side, and there was John Barry and me and Les and Norman, and George and Gary the other side. And I witnessed terrible things being said, awful. George is unpolitical, just gets on with the job. He just doesn't register it, doesn't argue. He just had a job to do, and that was to pull this film through, you know, and the stress put him in hospital. I mean, it was stress. They thought he was having a heart attack, and it was stress. Towards the end, it was not friendly, no.
It must have given you massive satisfaction to see the final version. Did those people that gave you such a hard time, did they kind of ever acknowledge, wow, this worked? As it kind of was nothing ever said?
Nothing was ever said, but the DP did write a revisionist kind of article that was put onto Star Wars Insider, and I read it, and it was such false information, a revision of history. So I immediately wrote a response to it and gave it to John Rinsler, who wanted to publish it, but he was stopped from doing so. And then at the end of his life, Gil Taylor published something for Red Dwarf. They did I think, an interview with him, and he said, "Yes, my only regret is not getting to know George Lucas a little bit better." You know, that was very late in his life. That's about all I've ever heard. The rest of it, you know, there's a huge lines of people now who made the lightsaber and who made this and who made that. You hear all sorts of people now who did all this stuff. But that's why David West Reynolds forced me to write this book, and then really they went on and on at me saying, "You've got to make the documentary on it because it's for the legacy for the future." Because, you know, kids now, they see Hollywood, huge movies and everything, but this started in a way that was, it was a low budget kind of string and sealing wax, I think we call it. There's an old British expression.
Well, it was extremely wonderful to be joined by you this afternoon, Roger.
And we'll do more. We'll be there. I'll be there anyway at the May North, be with you and stuff. So
exactly. So, you know, we've got. I'm sure there's plenty more interesting stories, and Roger's going to do a sort of Q&A style panel at May the North Be With You, and hopefully we'll try and ask him some stuff he hasn't been asked 17,000 times before.
Sure. I'm fine. I love Star Wars, and I'm very supportive of how it is the only thing that's connecting to the planet at this moment of good and evil, and with the right message for children, everything. So this is why I'm fully supportive of it, and I'll do everything I can.
Well, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Roger, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you here this evening here in the UK.
Yeah.
I'm very jealous. I'd love to be over in Canada. May the North be with you. I won't be there, so I hope you have a wonderful time. And
yeah, it'll be fun.
Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.